Hi everyone, this is Mindy Egan and welcome back to another Lawn Fawn video. In today's card, I am going to be playing with the new Pool Party stamp set and turning it into a slider card. I'm starting off by stamping out the images that I will be using for my card today, and these images include Pool Party. I have some clouds from All the Clouds, the lighthouse from Smooth Sailing, and the palm trees from Ahoy Matey. I'm stamping all of these images on 80-pound white cardstock because I'm going to be using my Copic markers to color them in and stamping them in the Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, which is Copic friendly. Now, after I stamp this first set of images down, I'm going to need to clean my palm trees and stamp a few more of those because I really wanted to have some fun kind of beachy scene going on, so I needed a few more palm trees. I will have all of my Copic markers listed at the top here for you, and I am going to start coloring in my inner tube. So I decided to go with some really fun, bright summer colors, starting with BG49 and BG13. Then I have the green, which is a YG07 and YG01. My yellow is Y19 and Y13. And then a really nice bright pink is going to be RV17 and RV14. I added the dark color to the edges and then put the light color in the center for my highlight area. For the in-between pieces of these colors, I wanted to have just a little bit of light gray to show some sort of shadow area. I grabbed an N2, which ended up being just way too dark for me, and I blended that out with a C0. But for the other tube, I'm just going to bring in a T1. So anything like a 0 or a 1 at the end would be great just to add little flicks of that shadow area. For the palm tree trunks, I have E57, 55, and 53. I added the darkest color kind of to the pieces of the tree trunks that were next to each other. And then I'm blending those out. So my highlight area is going to be the outside of each of those trunks. And you can see I'm just going to go ahead and color all of them at once because it was just the easiest way to do that. For some fun added detail, I'm going to bring back my E57 and I'm going to add little lines to that shadow area just to kind of make it look a little bit more realistic. Sometimes I think this is really fun to add those small details to images like this. For the coconuts, I'm going to come in with a little bit of a darker shade of brown, and for that I'll be using E79 and E74. Just putting a shadow area on one side of the coconut and filling that in with that lightest color, the E74. After I have all of my coconuts filled in, I'm going to work on coloring the actual top portion of my palm trees. And for some reason, I always struggle with palm trees or even leaves. And something I've learned recently is that when I'm putting in a shadow area, I'm going to add it to the part of the leaf, or in this case, the top of the palm tree, to the part that is facing the ground. So in all my case, I'm adding it to the very bottom of each portion of that palm tree and then blending it out with the remaining colors. So I have G17, YG06, and YG00, and that YG00 really adds a nice pop of brightness to make it look like the sun is really hitting the top of the trees there and making it just a really fun, bright color. I love adding anything to my scene that has bright greens in it like this because I think it really helps set the scene and just gives some nice contrast to colors, especially the background that I will be creating today. It's going to look really good against my bright yellow sun background. I can move on after this to coloring in my critters, and I will be starting with this cute little sloth that these guys are going to be sitting on the inner tubes. So for the sloth, I have E79, 77, 74, and for the face, I will be using E53. So I took my darkest color and I'm adding it to the outside edges of my sloth and the inside portion of the legs and blending out. Now the head can be a little tricky. I actually like to hold my marker almost straight up and down to get the very tip of my marker because it's such a thin line. I'll use E74 to color in the little pieces over the eyes and just a little bit of shadow with that E77. And I also use that E53 on my lamb. So for the lamb, I have W2, W0, and then I'm going to add little dots for texture with W4. The dots are always kind of something fun to add to those shadow areas because it almost makes it look, I don't know, to me it seems like fluffy. So I thought it was really cute. And then bringing in just an N4 for the hooves. I'm going to use that same N4 and then bring in N2 to add color to the lighthouse. Now the lighthouse I didn't actually end up using. It just didn't quite fit in with my final picture that I wanted, but I'm still showing the coloring here for you. For the rest of the piece of the lighthouse, I did R27 and R22, and then a little bit of T1 for a shadow area in the white areas. Now I'm using just a really light blue marker to add some detail to the clouds and also to my little speech bubble. Everything is all colored in, but I want to stamp a sentiment in my speech bubble real quick. So I just picked one off of the Pool Party stamp set, added it to a clear block, and stamping it in there with a VersaFine ink. I'm going to take out all the coordinating dies for the images, hold it down with a low tack tape, and die cut these out and set them off on the side while I work on my background. I am super, super excited to see this Sunray Stencil. I have been begging for a Sunray Stencil for a long time, so I had to include it in this card. So I have a piece of white cardstock here that's 80 pound, and I have it cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Now I'm moving my Sunray Stencil about a quarter, a little bit below halfway, I guess, up on my cardstock because I wanted the finer lines of the stencil. Now my stencil already has some pixie spray on it, which is a low tack adhesive spray. And even though I've washed it, it's still a little sticky. So I don't need to do much more to it except hold it down with my magnets at the top. Then I'm taking Wild Honey Distress Oxide ink and I am brushing in the same direction as the rays to apply my ink with a blending tool. That's just what I find easiest when it comes to thin, intricate stencils like this, is instead of going over them in circular motions, which you can, you just have to be really careful and light-handed with it. I just personally like to go in the way of the stencil, or the way the stencil is going. Sorry, hope that makes sense. Then after I have that color, I'm going to peel off my stencil, and to kind of tone this down a little bit, I'm going to pick up some of that leftover ink I have on my work surface and just blend this over lightly on that background so it's not so stark white and just really looks more like a sunray backdrop. Now the reason I chose to go partway up on my card with the stencil is because I know the bottom half is going to get covered up, so I don't need to worry about anybody seeing that portion of it. Now we could use this background as is, or you could add some water splatters to it. I thought it'd be really pretty to bring in the liquid stardust. I mixed a little bit with some water, and I was trying out this fan brush I've seen some creators use. So I picked up that mixture with the fan brush. I really wasn't liking it. I guess I'm just a creature of habit. This seemed to just put lines of it on my cardstock. I'm not sure. So I just went back to my old technique of adding that mixture to a block and then flicking it on with my paintbrush. I'm going to have 2 sets of waves on the front of my card. So I'm using the Stitched Wave Borders die, and I'm lining it up about where it's going to go on the front of my card. And I didn't need the whole piece of cardstock, so I just put a little bit of a pencil mark there about how high I wanted my stitched wave to be. And then I'm going to trim that out, and I'm just trimming it right above that pencil mark. This is going to save me a lot of cardstock and a lot of ink because I don't need to ink up the entire piece of cardstock, the bigger piece. So now here's that smaller piece I cut out. And on one end, I'm ink blending on Cracked Pistachio Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to turn it and ink blend on some peacock feathers. Now I sped this up, but I left my whole ink blending process in here. I really do go back and forth between my colors a lot to get a really good blend. So I'm going back and forth between Cracked Pistachio and peacock feathers to smooth out that transition. And I'm also protecting my fingers and the cardstock with a Post-it note just covering my fingertips. Now I'm going to add a little bit of Prize Ribbon Distress Oxide ink to the very bottom there, so after the peacock feathers. And once again, just take my blending tools and work through all of those colors. So it's not as quick and easy as I sometimes make it look. I do put a lot of work into my ink blending because that's just one of my favorite things to do. So that to me is what I put a lot of time into. Now I can line up that stitched wave border, and you can try and hold it down with Post-it tape, but it probably is not going to stick. So I'm just going to hold it on my plates, hopefully good enough to cut it straight across that piece I blended. So here's how the front of the card is looking. And I'm going to bring in that other half of the cardstock I trimmed down. And that's going to be perfect for the second wave that I want to put in the background. Now, once again, for this one, I don't need to cover the entire panel, but I did anyway, just in case. And you could have started with maybe some colored cardstock, but I wanted all the colors to really match. So I ink blended this with peacock feathers and then brought in a little bit of prize ribbon towards the very bottom. Then once I have that blended, which doesn't have to be perfect because most of it is hidden, I'm going to line up that other stitched wave across the top and die cut that out. So I'm going to layer these pieces together, and I constantly do this with my cards. I'm constantly, whatever I color or ink blend or die cut, I'm laying it together to see where my card is at right now and if that's what I want. So I decided I wanted to add a little bit of a beach in the background, and I'm using these simple stitched hillside borders. I'm going to add a little bit of antique linen distress oxide ink and then bring in some vintage photos. So once again, you're really not going to see most of this. I just needed to add some color to that beach. So after this is all blended, I'll die cut out with that simple hillside to create a very small distant beach on the background of my card. So as I'm going through this, I'm kind of thinking about what can I put together right now to kind of get out of the way and not have all these pieces on my desk. So I laid out my scene and I'm adding the little critters to their tubes. I'm using the new lawnfawn large glue tube, and it is like 90 degrees outside when I was creating this video, and I hadn't turned my air on yet, so everything is super liquidy. It's all coming out of my liquid bottle or my glue bottles very fast, so I just dab off any excess with my fingertips. So I'm just adding the little sunglasses to my critters. So I have that ready. I have these guys because I need them to figure out my slider card. I die cut out one of the slider pieces using the slide on over die from that bottom wave that I had ink blended. But now I can get some of this scene put together. So I'm gluing down my beach scene, and I'm also kind of just lifting up the top there. So if I want to tuck some palm trees in there, I have a little bit of wiggle room. I can also go ahead and add my back wave because I don't really have to do much with this. And then I'm figuring out about how my scene is going to look. So I added some trees. I also die cut out the word hello using the Henry's ABCs, and I was able to glue down my clouds. I'm also able to go ahead and glue down my palm trees in the back. I have two on each side, I think it is, 2 sets on each side. And then I can flip this over and trim off any excess that's hanging off the edges because this is going to be my entire card front. I can also figure out where my critters are going to go and glue that back critter down. So I'm just doing that with a tape runner, kind of placing it off on the left-hand side a little bit, not directly in the center. But before I go any further, I want to get my sentiment stamped on here. And the sentiment is going to come from the pool party stamp set. But my cloud was a little bit too far in. So I just carefully peel that up, and then I can rub away that adhesive with my finger. Now I can bring in my sentiment that I'm going to stamp at the very top. And because I used Distress Oxide ink on the background, I'm stamping my sentiment in VersaFine ink. You just want to give it a minute or two to dry because it does stay wet a little bit longer than a regular dye ink. Now I can bring my cloud back in, and I had to scoot it over a little bit, but I'll just flip it over and trim off the excess there. Now on to how to create that slider. So I'm taking my bottom wave that I die cut out that slide on over die cut from, and I'm going to use a penny for my sliding piece. So I just place that there just so I know exactly where I'm going. And I'm taking some of the foam and I'm triple layering it. This is going to make sure I give my slider a lot of room to move around. So I triple layered that together, and then I'm trimming this into thin strips. I want to line the back of my wave piece there with this foam, but you don't want the foam to touch the penny, which is why it's kind of sitting there as a placeholder. If it's going to get in the way of the penny, your slider is not going to move. So I'm just trimming down my foam pieces, and I'm going to layer that all the way around. I had to get kind of skinny for the one towards the very top, but I did need to make sure I had support. So not only is this keeping everything in place, it's going to add dimension, and my slider is going to move freely. I'm also going to take a little small piece of that tripled up foam, and I'm going to cut it off, and I'm going to add this to my penny. So I'm taking my wave background here. I'm going to stick the penny in that slot there so it's showing through of my slider spot. I'm going to take that foam, that small piece of foam that I cut, and I'm going to place it on top of the penny through that slider window that I created. The penny is what we are going to attach our critter to. So I have that small foam piece that fits right in the slider portion. Now I would have paused here and added a little bit of anti-static powder around the edges, but I forgot to do that. So my slider does stick a little bit. So if you were to do this, I would add that anti-static powder around the edges of that small foam piece before removing the backing and adding my little sloth on the inner tube. Now I flipped this over and I'm taking that anti-static powder tool and I'm going around all the edges on this back side just to make sure everything is going to slide smoothly. Then I can remove all the backing and I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to place this on the front of my card. So now we have our slider attached to the front. It adds some great dimension. I'm going to give it a little bit of a practice run to make sure that it's moving, which I really can't fix at this point if it's not because it's all glued down with the foam tape, but it works, thankfully. So here I have die cut Hello using the Henry's ABCs. I die cut it 2 times from white cardstock and once from mermaid cardstock, and I layered them together and offset it on that light blue cardstock. Now I'm taking some removable Scotch tape and I'm placing it over my letters that I had lined up using the grid surface so they are all nice and straight. And this helps me so I can pick it up and place it wherever I want on my background and it's all put together. So I added dots of liquid glue to the back of that, just kind of dabbing up the excess with my finger. I'm going to pick this up with the sides of that removable tape and attach this to the front of the card. I'm going to kind of push this down and let it sit for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then I'll carefully peel back that tape. Now, the reason I let it sit for about 5 to 10 seconds is I want it to kind of be stuck down, but then I want to be able to wiggle it if I need to. If maybe I bumped something or something isn't straight, I still have a little bit of wiggle time because I'm using liquid glue. After I pulled back that tape, I'm going to set down some blocks to let it sit for a little bit longer. I have one last finishing touch that I thought of at the last minute, and that is adding some detail with my white Jelly Roll pen. So I'm going in to the palm trees, just adding a line and 2 dots to kind of pretty much the shadow areas. So I did that to the palm trees. I also did it to parts of the inner tube and just one side of each of the critter. And there we have a really fun slider card. I think this is super cute that sloth is kind of moving with the waves of the water, floating on that inner tube, just having a great day. I hope you enjoyed today's card project. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.